dudes, Dev and the place down there. We're some kind of YouTube channel. And today we got two decks for you. They're both budget mono red decks. I know I've gotten a lot of requests for this over the last couple of weeks here. You know, what do we do with mono red post rotation? Well, I think we're still waiting on a couple of pieces to come down the pipeline from VFZ, but for now, we can make a couple of decks with no Theros, no M15, just to sort of showcase where we go from here once we lose some key cards. And I do think there are some interesting directions to go in, so let's go ahead and hit you with some of these decks. Well, the first thing to bring to you here is a budget Impact Tremors build post-rotation. Now, we did build red-black Impact Tremors about a month ago, but that had cards from Theros M15 and cost a little bit of money. This cost almost nothing, is very, very focused, and will carry you through the rotations. So let me give it to you. Let's start off with a couple of dashers in the one-drop slot here. We've got 2 copies of Lightning from Final Fantasy XIII and 2 copies of Zurgs, the Zurgo, the great and mighty Zurg. Both of these cards dash in, are fairly efficient, obviously good against things like sorcery speed mass removal, and sorcery speed removal in general. Ruinous Path is probably going to be a card, that's sorcery speed. So that's something to think about. And you know, Lightning Berserker can get through an awful lot of damage just in one swing, and Zurgo can do, you know, 6-8 for us over the course of the game. And you don't have to dash either one of these things in, but you could if you wanted. Very versatile creatures, and especially Berserker. She can just strike from out of nowhere, and these are very good cards, especially for the price. 3 copies of the money in the deck. This is Monastery Swiftspear. She wasn't in the deck for a while, and she just didn't function the way I wanted it to without her. I love Monastery Swiftspear. This is one of my favorite creatures of all time, if I'm being honest with you. I've been playing Magic 20 years, and she's probably in my top 10 creatures all time. I cannot live in a red deck, especially a mono red deck, without Swiftspear. You know, just you and me, Swiftspear. 3 copies of Mardu Scout, 3 power, 2 mana. That's all you need to know, and it's another dasher. We don't want to overload on dashers or anything. We don't want to clog up our hand, and after the first time you play a dasher, you pretty much telegraph that you have that in your hand from now on. But as good as it is against, you know, Languish, Crux of Fate, even Tragic Arrogance is becoming a thing nowadays, that's good to have. So, again, don't want to overload too much, but 3 power, 2 mana, you don't see that every day, especially in red, so I am obligated to play this in a budget build. Here's where it's going to start getting funky. 2 copies of Thopter Engineer. We're an Impact Tremors build. It's really, really good to have things that produce, you know, more than one creature when they come into play. Plus, she's a 1/3, which she blocks very well early game. And we need that. The deck goes very wide, and there are times where you're going to do, you know, 10 damage in a hurry, and then to close out the game, you're going to have to rely on Impact Tremors, burn, and things like that. So it's good to have something that not only helps you continue to go wide, but also deal extra damage with Impact Tremors, which is more or less how you're looking to close out the game once you get to their last 6 to 8 life. So really important creature for the deck and helps block. 2 copies of Pia and Kiran, our 2 4-drops here. Again, very, very good with Impact Tremors, and along with Thopter Engineer allows you to, you know, sack for 2 damage and kill guys and stuff like that, clear them out of the way, or just deal damage to the face. You know, Pia and Kiran's activated ability is actually crazy, and the fact that you get, you know, the 4 power for 4 mana, 2 of it flies, you know. Right now, it works fairly well in Standard, and you do see it even in some, like, Jeskai builds. It's odd how many places this card pops up, and that's because it's a very respectable card. Here's the really weird one. We are playing 1 5-drop, but you know, when I see aggro decks or decks labeled as aggro, play 5 and 6-drop dragons and stuff sometimes, so I don't feel bad about playing. You know, I see Ojutai and Stormbreath in aggro, so I don't feel bad about playing 1 Embermaw Hellion. Now, this works for a million different reasons. Not only will all of our tokens deal an extra damage when they go through, not only will our burn do an extra damage when it hits to creatures or players, but Impact Tremors will deal 2 damage for every creature that comes into play, which, you know, like Hordeling Outburst gets crazy really, really fast. If you have an Impact Tremors and a Embermaw Hellion out, just things get very, very dumb very quick. This will close the game out for you very, very quickly, helps us have a game plan long, and helps us finish very well too. So I've liked Embermaw Hellion when I've seen it, but you don't see it every game. Here are our spells. Let's start you off with some burn. 3 copies of Wild Slash, 2 copies of Collateral Damage, and 2 copies of Roast. I might as well go ahead and give you all that burn. Obviously, we got to pick creatures off the board so that we can get through it, not have to chump block, because it's not something that we necessarily have to want to do. Even if we can chump block, we can't stand up to a Siege Rhino turn after turn after turn, so we've got to be able to burn those creatures away. Something like Roast helps. Wild Slash can obviously go to the face if need be against control decks and things like that, where we just have to do a couple of extra damage, or it can clear out creatures from our path when we're trying to get through for damage with our dudes. Collateral Damage damage is obvious in this deck, I think. We're playing so many tokens and things like that that collateral damage is something else that just helps us finish out the game. We can afford to blow a creature on a collateral damage and basically bolt them. Very powerful effect. 2 copies of Titan Strength in the deck, not only because we're playing Swiftspear, but because we're playing a lot of token generators and stuff like that. And being able to get a 1/1 through for 4 damage out of nowhere is actually really good. I'd like to fit more Titan Strength in the decks, but I didn't really see a place for it, and this was the last card added. And I've seen some decks play a 1 of Titan Strength, you know, and I thought about doing that, but I went ahead and made it 2 here and cut back the 24th land in the deck, which I can understand if you take some issue with. Just add the 24th land and cut a Titan Strength. It's totally fine if you want to do that. But I've had plenty of success doing this. Titan Strength, a very important card also because it helps us scry away any unneeded lands or anything that we don't need at that point. We're playing 4 copies of Dragon Fodder and 4 Hordeling Outburst. We're just going all the way with it, you guys. Obviously, these are another key card in the deck. I want to play a full play set of each because we get an awful lot of value out of all of them. So I want to play as many copies of these token generators as possible. And the Big Daddy, 4 copies of Impact Tremors. I've said everything that needs to be said about the cards so far. We don't absolutely have to have it to win the game because we can just sort of go very wide and overwhelm with creatures. And we've got tricks, Titan Strength. Some of our dudes have evasion, Pia and Kiran's tokens and Thopter Engineer's tokens, you know. Monastery Swiftspear. Obviously, Lightning Berserker, Zurgo, Mardu Scout, they survive a lot of deck sorcery speed removal plans. So we've got a lot of different ways, you know, angles of attack in this deck, but Impact Tremors really makes the whole thing come together, and I'd love to play 4 copies, so I did. 23 mountains. Look at it, 23 mountains. Here's the board. There's some cool stuff in here against control, especially Molten Vortex and Scab Clan Berserkers. An absolutely wonderful card, you guys. I fully suggest you try her out because she's been very, very good in testing. Very good. Don't want to talk too much about the board because I got to get on to the next deck because this is a fairly, I think, standard mono-red budget, especially sideboard. You guys let me know if you have any ideas. Here are the power rankings for this deck. A 58 final score, which is really not bad, and the aggressive players will like this deck. I'll say this, it kind of sucks sacrificing your second turn to play Impact Tremors in an aggressive deck, a deck that wants to be aggressive. Obviously, this is a sacrifice of initiative. You're sacrificing all the initiative on a crucial turn, the second turn, in order to gain value over the long game. So the deck does go long in some ways, but it has so much synergy with some of the things that we're playing that we can really build around it very well, even in this budget shell. Obviously, our dashers come into play. You know, if we keep dashing them, they come into play every turn, dealing extra incremental damage through Impact Tremors. Also, we've got a lot of token generators in the deck. Token generators go very well with Impact Tremors, right? Not only that, but I think the cool thing about this deck, above all else, is that usually tokens decks that have a lot of, you know, Pia and Kiran, Thopter Engineer, Dragon Fodder, Hordeling Outburst, all those cards, bad against mass removal. Now, we can cover our bases a little bit and, you know, help our weakness out by playing these creatures with dash, especially things like Lightning Berserker, which is very good against mass removal, and even Mardu Scout, Zurgo, all these cards really good against mass removal. It helps cover our weakness against mass removal like we would normally have in this token generating deck. That's something I really, really like about it. Now, Impact Tremors, sacrificing our second turn play for that. Back to that for just a moment before I move on to the next deck. We do go a little bit long, but every turn that you take, like I said, every turn that you take will definitely decrease your chances of winning by some %. So there's a sweet spot in this deck. You need to win by the 6th, 7th, 8th turn or your chances will drastically slide downhill. But that's plenty of time to get set up, and even after, you know, they would have normally just spot removed some of our dudes, we've gotten some value out of them because of Impact Tremors. We've hopefully gotten them down to, you know, 8 to 12 life so that we can deal the last few damage off of Impact Tremors, you know, creatures coming into play. Whether or not we get to actually deal damage in combat with them is irrelevant. We get to deal damage when they come into play with Impact Tremors. At that point, multiple instances of Impact Tremors are very good to get and more likely to be drawn into as the game goes on because we're playing a play set of them. So yeah, it's honestly, as the game goes on, like I said, sweet spot. That's the thing to remember. That's the thing to remember. I'm coaching you a lot on this deck because I really like playing it, but there's an awful lot of nuance to playing this deck, especially for a deck that is ostensibly an aggro deck. Alright everybody, this is Budget Goblins, a deck that I know a lot of people are super stoked for, and I am too, to be honest with you. I hope that we see at least one more BA Zoblin in BFZ, so that this deck can really be good. Now, we're not playing any cards from Battle for Zendikar, or I might include a Zada or two in this one, but I'm not doing that just yet. Don't worry, BFZ deck techs are coming soon, just waiting to see a little bit more of this set. But here's what we got of Goblins so far. 18 creatures in the deck, a few more creatures in the last deck. This one is ultimately more aggressive because we're not playing Impact Tremors. We can actually play 2-drop creatures, which we can do in Impact Tremors, but we're much more focused on it in this deck. We're playing 4 copies, to start the creatures off, of Goblin Glory Chaser. Now, I wouldn't mind playing Swiftspear in this deck either, but that's my sort of personal preference. We are playing 19 spells in the deck, so it helps, something like Swiftspear would still be fine. But I want to stay a little bit on theme here, and Glory Chaser is very good, especially with the next card that I'm going to point out, which is 4 copies of Subterranean Scout. This can obviously help your Glory Chaser go Renown, but just the second turn right there, that's awesome. It's good to just unconditional Renown is very good, almost unconditional. And Goblin Piledriver, Subterranean Scout helps that out, obviously. You put your Goblin Piledriver out, next turn, Subterranean Scout, targeting that, and you can swing in. It can get as big as it wants. It's still unblockable. You've already said this guy's unblockable for this turn. So that can actually help facilitate game-ending enormous swings in this deck. And you gotta have Subterranean Scout. It's a very, very good card. Goblins always has something that you can't block. Frenzied Goblin, Mono Red Aggro had, what was it, Hammer Fist, last go round, this last format, and we've got to have something that just lets our dudes get through nearly unconditioned, or at least stops the best guy from blocking. So, gotta play 4 copies of Scout. Speaking of gotta play 4 copies of Scout, 4 copies of Mardu Scout as well. Yeah, this is the only thing in the deck that dashes, helping us again against sorcery speed removal. Broken record right here, this guy. But we gotta have something like this in this deck. They're not very resilient, to be honest with you. If they break us up with a languish or something like that, we have to claw our way back into the game. And this sort of mitigates the damage from that. And again, 3 power for 2 mana, unbeatable, especially in red decks. And I know it doesn't have synergy with the Scout, that's totally fine. 4 copies of Piledriver, the centerpiece of the deck. We actually have to have him to justify playing Goblins, I think, at all right now. So, especially post-rotation, from what we've seen so far. He is the HBIC around here, and there's no reason to explain why we're playing Goblin Piledriver. He is the most important creature in the deck by a lot. And to finish off the creatures, 2 copies of Goblin Heel Cutter, another thing that helps our dudes get through unblocked, which is very, very important. Not only that, but 3 power is just fine right there on the curve at 3. I almost want to dash this in nearly every turn, which is fine, because it's on the very, very top end of the curve. And after we get to that much mana, we're not going to be doing too much else. Especially if we're still hitting our drops, Once we get to 4 or 5 mana, we can always dash this in and do something else, which is very important. But Heel Cutter is a very, very good card, especially when, again, we're packing stuff like Goblin Piledriver, and we want to get the Renown on Goblin Glory Chaser. There's many, many reasons to play this card. 19 spells. Let me hit you with the burn again. 4 copies of Wild Slash, 1 copy of Fiery Impulse this time, and 2 copies of Roast again. For all of the same reasons discussed, Wild Slash can hit him in the face. The other 2 can burn out creatures that would normally be in your way. We're playing mono red. Let's burn them. 4 copies of Dragon Fodder and 4 copies of Hordeling Outburst in this deck here. Yeah, again, I just want to get as much value out of Piledriver as I possibly can, and I want to go as wide as we possibly can too. 18 creatures, and then 8 things that produce more than 1 creature when you play them. So we're going very, very wide in the deck, and this makes Goblin Piledriver absolutely huge. And even if you don't have a Piledriver out, these can swing in through huge dudes and help in the game. Even when they have big guys out, they're going to take, 1, 2 damage, which is actually very, very important for late game aggro strategies. So yeah, I want to play all the copies of these I possibly can. 4 copies of Infectious Bloodlust in the deck. That's the fun one, right? Yeah, Infectious Bloodlust is actually really, really good. It's not like other auras, We're not going to get 2 for 1 unless they pick off the very last Infectious Bloodlust, at which point they will have gone through quite a few Infectious Bloodlusts, so we don't care. The plus 2 power is just crazy for the 2 mana, and it stays on there as an enchantment until they can deal with it. So it can even make small creatures into larger creatures, Our Subterranean Scouts have 4/2. That can be really hard to deal with for some decks and deal a lot of damage in just a couple of turns, The new Rancor, it's not, don't get me wrong, but in a deck like this is very, very good. 23 mountains in this deck as well. And here's our sideboard. It's not really that much different than the first deck, although notice the Impact Tremors in our sideboard. And here are the power rankings. 1 point higher, not by design either, it just happened that way. A 59 is the final score in this deck. We're a little bit higher in speed because we don't have to sacrifice our second turn to something that doesn't affect the board right away. We don't ever have to do that in this deck. That's important. We're a little lower in the synergy department, but we do have some synergies, mostly with Piledriver. But that's about it. Everything else is pretty much where you'd want it to be. Obviously, we're very high in the offense and consistency stats there, because all we're worried about is attacking, 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 no matter what. The Impact Tremors deck can sort of hold back. It doesn't have to attack. It can win on its own. This deck has to attack. Has to attack every turn to be very aggressive to win. That's why the offense is so high. And it's a very consistent deck because we're playing so many 4-of copies in this deck that we can pretty much game plan and know, even we can count cards and know more or less what we may draw next, you know. I've got a very high chance of drawing a pile driver now because I haven't seen one in 12 cards, and it's about freaking time. So just we can really depend on drawing the cards that we need to in this deck because it's so focused and playing so many 4-ofs. Very consistent deck. Well, that's all I got for now. Hope you guys enjoyed that. Coming up next is definitely Mardu Dragons. I got so much response for that. It was actually hard to pick between these two decks here, but I think Mono Red is something that more people will have access to than Mardu Dragons, and will still be an important deck, even though it's so easy to build and pretty cheap. Still be an important deck in the upcoming format, and we sort of want ideas on where to go with that deck. So I hope I've given you some ideas, because there's many, many, many more things we can do. You know, there's always Mono Red Dragons. That could be a thing after the format shifts. We'll have to see. We obviously lose Stormbreath Dragon, but there are other things that we can do in that deck. Don't count it out just yet. So Mardu Dragons is coming up next. That people really like that deck, and so do I. I've been doing a lot of aggro lately, and Mardu Dragons sort of plays like a control deck, so I've had a lot of fun doing that. But in any case, if you like the content, please help us out. Please do that. Like, share, comment, and if you haven't done it yet, subscribe, because, you know, I know there's a lot of people in the comments that haven't subscribed yet. Why do it? You watch my videos, subscribe. You want to know when I come out with new stuff, right? In any case, I'm Dev from SBMTG. Thanks for watching, my wizards.